because it's sitting down and facing a whole bunch of people sitting down. I didn't expect such a turnout this morning, I have to say. It is a Saturday rainy morning in Sydney. I have to say I didn't expect the reaction to the last book that I had. I've been writing a long time this series, as many of you know, and I've had some pretty acrimonious letters from people who were threatening all sorts of things if I didn't get my act together and finish the book. I remember seeing somebody tweet, and the only reason I saw it was because it appeared that it had my name in it, and so I saw it. And the girl said, "I hate that stupid cow, Isobelle Carmody. She's never going to finish that stupid series, and she's never going to get her act together." And I just thought, oh, the poor girl. So I wrote to her, I went on to her thing and I said, I know, I wish I'd get my act together too and hurry up and finish it. I'm sorry, but life really gets in the way. And I just meant it as I understood her frustration. But the next thing, she didn't respond to me, but she tweeted, I love Isobelle Carmody. She responded to me. So I just thought, okay, they're probably going to forgive me when it's all over. I don't know what I thought the end would be like. Writing it was pretty dramatic. Writing it against a really horrible deadline was pretty dramatic. And at different points, nobody was sure, in me included, that I was going to make it by the deadline to actually fulfill the publisher's date. And they put a date out, and I think they put it out as a sign of faith and hope and as a whip to crack over my head. And I took it in all those ways, and I really wanted to meet that deadline. But the first thing has to be that the book has to be right. And so I was prepared all along to bear whatever tsunami of horrible words came to me if I couldn't finish it in time. And it was with immense relief that I did actually make the deadline. I wrote a few chapters of it, or edited the last few chapters of it, at Christine Bonger's house. She's a writer too. She used to be an ABC journalist. And I had to run away from my family because my daughter couldn't understand that I can't stop and make Vegemite toast every other minute. And because I need to stay in the world. And people don't get, unless you are writers, you will know this, but people don't get that, in fact, you can't just put it down and pick it up again all of the time. You have to keep it in your head, and you have to keep your head in it. So in the end, I really did need some space. And she said, look, we've got this house up on the coast, just underneath the Sunshine Coast. Why don't you go there? So I said to my partner, I'm running away from home for, I think it'll be a week. And he said, what do you mean you think it'll be a week? Is this like you think you'll finish in 1 year and it's 3 years later? And I said, no, your family, I have to be more accurate. And I said, I think it'll take me a week to finish the thing, but I need to go, and I just want my mind to be clear. So I went away, and I don't have a car up there, so I had to walk with my little wheelie bag, catch 2 buses, catch a train, catch another bus, and then walk. And so it's quite a long journey there, and I finally walked through a really big shopping mall finally to get to the other side. And then there's this pristine bit of sea coast and a house, this white house 2 levels high, and this gorgeous, gorgeous house with nobody in it but me, shining house, all of white. And I just came in and I felt like I'd stepped onto a blank page, literally. And so I wrote the final part of the book in that. And on the last day, I said, can I ask if anyone's actually finished the book yet? I only ask, okay, so there's only one person in this room who'll know why the fact of having an earthquake on the last day sort of really mattered to me quite a lot. I was walking across the top floor of the room, and I wanted to honour this beautiful place I'd finished the book in. It was perfectly spotless. It didn't need honouring with cleaning, but I wanted to honour it. So I was washing everything in sight, and I put the towels in the washing machine, and I come upstairs, and then the house started to shake. And I thought, oh, it's probably the washing machine that's having hysterics, the way washing machines sometimes you jump up and down. And then I thought, but this is a whole stone house. How could a whole house be shaking? If I didn't know better, I'd think this was an earthquake. And then I laughed and I looked out at the sea and I had this completely nonsensical thought. I thought, oh, but there's the sea, it can't be an earthquake. I don't know why I thought proximity to the sea meant there couldn't be an earthquake, but that seemed perfectly rational in that moment to me, which probably tells you somewhere where I was mentally. And the next day someone texted me to say, did the earth move for you yesterday? And I thought, oh my God, it was an earthquake. And only one person in this room will know why that was shocking to me, but the rest of you will figure it out. The response that erupted on the day the book came out was tremendously exciting, and not just exciting because of what I did expect, which was people saying, oh, finally good, those people who were with me, who'd stayed with me, and who I knew were looking forward to it. I expected that response. But what I didn't expect was the kind of emotional response that started to come. And it really, I mean, I know that it's meant a lot to some people because I've got long correspondences with people over the years from when they were children. And I'm a handwriter, I write everything by hand, including really, really long letters to people. And if a person writes to me on the right day, they get basically a book back in response if I'm in the mood, or if they ask the right question. So I really like writing by hand, so I do have a lot of correspondences with people, and people who've grown up reading the books. So I know to some extent, in some ways, what it would have meant to people. But I guess I thought they were sort of isolated examples. I didn't realise that when you write a book or a series over such a period of time, it's woven into people's lives. And it's not actually the book or me at all anymore, it's an alchemy between the reader and the book. For me, I wrote those books for perfectly selfish reasons. I wrote them at 14 to begin with. I wrote Obernewtyn at 14 because it was a place to go for me. I was lonely, I was a misfit, I didn't fit in, I was scared of many people and many things. I didn't like the world. I thought the adults had truly messed it up horrendously, and that they'd probably do it again and it would be worse next time. So that's what I grew up thinking. And I just was looking for a place to find hope in a way. And I guess the only place you can ever find hope is you have to build it yourself. And so little by little in my secret place, that writing that I was doing, I built a world in which hope seemed to be, I was striving for hope. It wasn't a world with an easy answer of hope, because I don't think that hope is a thing that you can have like a lolly, you eat it and it's gone. I think it's an ongoing fight to have hope in the face of things that are not right in the world, or things that you see that are wrong, or even things in your own life that are not the way you want them to be. Life is a striving, it's an art. And for me, that was pouring into that first book that I wrote. And when I finally did send it off, I was quite a lot, I was in my 20s, and a really tough old editor found one of my stories, and he said, and he was this really big guy, with this gruff guy with this kind of voice and a smoke, and he said, "Is this yours, Isobelle?" And I said, "Yeah, sorry," because it was on his desk. And he said, "You ever thought of getting a publisher?" And I realised in that moment that this really big, tough, old, grey-haired, really scary guy had read the story that I'd written. And I can tell you the story's title was "The Most Awful Thing in the World." Now, he read that story. A man like that, in his business suit with his tough and his set, read that story. And he told me, he was a publisher, an editor, and he said, "Have you ever thought of getting published?" And that was the first moment it occurred to me. And the moment it did, I immediately thought, well, actually, some of the books I read, I think what I'm writing is as good as at least some of the books that I'm reading. So it just seemed like, oh yeah, I'll try that. That's a great idea. So I didn't know how to go about getting published, but inside the front cover of every book in really small writing, very conveniently, is the name of all the people who've ever published it. So I thought, oh, how good. And so I wrote myself a long list of publishers, because I knew that you have to be rejected 700 times before you get accepted. And I was really, really lucky. Well, lucky, I was lucky, but I also only chose the publishers who published the stuff I liked. So I figured they must be good publishers, since they only published things I thought were good. So that's how I made my selection process. And I sent the book out to the first one on the list. That was Penguin. Penguin accepted the book, and that was the end of that particular story. So I didn't get all those 700 rejections. And that's also meant I don't have a bottom drawer. So people are always saying to me, "Don't you have something in your bottom drawer?" And at first I didn't even know what that meant. People who write for a while know instantly what the bottom drawer means. So I don't actually have a bottom drawer. No doubt I'll have one someday, but I haven't got one yet. I guess I haven't had time to have one with all the things that I've been doing. So when I finally did finish and wrote those books over such a long period of time, it was only now, reading the letters and the things that people are saying on the internet and tweeting, and not necessarily, I'm seeing a lot of them because I'm being CC'd into lots of things, but I also see lots of them that aren't aimed at me. And I'm realising that when people say, "This is the end of my childhood," which seemed rather apocalyptic to me the first time I read, I'm responsible for killing off childhood. That was daunting. But I realised it meant that when you write something over a long period of time, you weave yourself into the lives of the people that read it. And I remember right in my early career being told a lot of the time by editors, Isobelle, if you don't finish this, people will stop reading the series. And I believe it happens sometimes, but I'm lucky that it didn't happen to me. In fact, I think I'm material proof that it doesn't have to be that way, that you can take your time to make something the way that you want it to be, and that you can even have long gaps that drive people crazy and make them threaten you with misery, like, if any of you have read Stephen King, responses to the long gaps between things. If I was on the internet and I came on Facebook, posted a comment on someone's Facebook page, the first response I'd often get is, why are you doing this? Why aren't you finishing the book? And there were many times and my editor was actually frightened to tweet anything either in the final days, because we thought somebody would see that she was actually on the internet liking her son's band instead of finishing the book. So it really got that weird in the end. It's been an amazing journey, and I have to say that it's been something, really something. I don't even know how to begin to talk about what it's felt like to, for me it's a huge culmination, and it's a bittersweet culmination, because it's the last time will I ever be able to say this. It's the last time I'll ever see the world through Elspeth's eyes. And in a way she's my younger self, so in a sort of way I guess I'm also saying goodbye to my childhood too, and that's a weird thing, a weird thing to do, because it isn't an end. Thank you. Yeah. I wonder now what will happen though. I wonder what happens next. I mean, I keep getting my one of the interviews that I had. I should tell you that every single journalist who's interviewed me so far has cried during the interview, and that's because every one of them was a reader who read me as a child. And it's incredible to see these beautiful, sophisticated young women come up to you, and they're terrifyingly competent and beautiful, and then they start talking and they suddenly turn into a misfit who was once. And I mean, maybe the truth is that I didn't know when I was that age. Maybe the truth is that we're all misfits at some point in our lives. We all have those moments when you can't do it too. If you just start dabbing at your eyes, I'm going to be in big trouble. I think we all have those moments in our lives when we feel tremendously alone. And as a kid, I really did feel alone a lot of the time. I wasn't unhappy, I have to say, all the time when I was alone. I mean, it's okay to be on your own sometimes. It's okay even to be lonely sometimes. Maybe it's good for us to be a bit alone sometimes. But there are moments when you do feel it's really a void that you're in. And if I feel that void for anybody as I feel it for myself, well, that's really something. I can honestly feel I did a good thing in my life if I filled that void. But I think for all of us, finishing a series, I don't know what to say about finishing a series. I didn't want to finish at some level. I didn't like finishing at some level. And yet I'm happy to have finished. It sounds so muddled to say it in that way. I am happy to have finished. It was a story that I devised entire. I didn't know everything that was going to happen, obviously. If you, as many people have visually, even on the internet, compared the first and the last book, there's a huge difference between the first and the last book. But in a way, somebody asked me this morning in an interview, do you think you've changed much between the girl, or did the book change much between the book the girl wrote at 14 and the book that was published in her 20s? And I would say that book and that series and that character of Elspeth has changed as much as I've changed from 14 to now, which is to say, in some ways a great deal, and in some ways not at all. Because inside of us is that misfit, is that child we once were. We don't stop being any of those ages. We remember them, and as long as we remember them and remain in touch with them, then they still exist for us. So the girl that I was at 14, I still care about the same things that girl cared about. I know more, and I've lived through more, I've had more experience. I might have compromised in my life where she didn't, because she didn't have to, she was a child. I might have gone in directions I didn't always love in life, and she didn't have to because she was a child. I might be less pure in my ideals because I know that it's hard to hold an ideal in the world. But the essence of her, the essence of that girl who wrote those books is still inside me. And I believe that it must be inside all of us, the person we were as a child. And I sometimes believe, well, I actually do passionately believe, that the adults we become are based on the things that we do and the choices we make as a child. And maybe that's why those series had such an impact on a generation of kids. I mean, 30 years, that's like 3 decades worth of kids reading it and having that same feeling. How can any writer do that? I was talking the other day about a talking somewhere, Perth I think I'd had, and at the end of the talk somebody stood up and aggressively waved their hand at me, and the talk was over, but I felt it was really passionate, so I said, yeah, what is it? Would you like to ask your question? And she said, yes, how can you ever fulfill all my desires? And she meant in the final book. And I said, honey, nobody can ever fulfill all your desires. Not me and not anyone else in the world and not any book. But I can fulfill my desires. And in a funny sort of way, because I wrote those stories for myself as passionately as I possibly could, I had to believe that the end that I would come to, even if it wasn't the end that you imagined, would be satisfying to you in some way. It's not a shut door in the sense that you will know absolutely everything by the end of the book, because life isn't like that. It's not a story in which everything works out perfectly, because life isn't like that either. But it is. I am a person with hope, so I think that you'll find that at the end of the book as well. And I don't think I should talk any more about the book itself. Where are my time-wise? And I've run out of time. Should I go into questions? I thought maybe it might be good to throw it open to questions now if anybody wants to ask anything in particular, before I get really mushy or mushier. Yes?
I was thinking...
I can hear you though. I can repeat your question.
Sorry,
I was thinking that often fiction reflects, like apocalyptic fiction reflects, I guess, the fears of the time. And I was just sort of wondering if you had any comments around, I don't know, the nuclear sort of apocalypse there, because it seems to not fit, I guess, with, I don't know, my understanding of, you know, fears around the 90s, or yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think many people know that my dad had died in the same year I started to write the book. He had died in a car accident, and I think there can be no event in a child's life more like a nuclear apocalypse than having a parent die, especially an adored father, which he was for me. But I did have a teacher who did a series with us, and she was talking about the Manhattan Project, and I switched myself off. So she took us on a really interesting arc through it. She started out letting us look at the scientists who were looking into the nuclear fission in Alamogordo Desert. And it was really exciting to read about these scientists trying to make these exciting discoveries. And I wanted to be a scientist. I was going to be an inventor. That's what I thought I was going to be. I had a Bunsen burner and a microscope. I was going to do all that. And I realised you needed maths, and that was the end of that career. So I was really into science, and to me it seemed full of excitement and ideas, and so I was very attracted to it. But then she led us into, you know, the paranoid military surrounding the science. And that was kind of, she made it very comical as well, more comical than perhaps it really was. But so that seemed funny and weird too. And then she led us into the thing that perhaps sealed it for me most. She read out a series of they'd be called testimonials now, by survivors of nuclear, of the bombs dropping on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Of course, she took us through that. And that was frightening in one level, but very distant to kids. But then she read us these testimonials, and one that really stuck in my mind was an old grandmother minding a baby, and her son and her daughter-in-law were in the city working in 2 jobs in Hiroshima, and she was on the outskirts in a park, and that was when the bomb dropped. So she saw it. She was a survivor in the sense that she survived the first blast. Of course, she didn't survive the aftermath, and neither did the child. And I remember hearing this as a kid and thinking, oh my God, this could happen any time. Somebody somewhere thought that was a good idea. They didn't have to drop that bomb. I mean, I realised that years later studying. That was the worst thing, the realisation they didn't even have to drop it, or drop them. And so this feeling of awful absurdity, the possibility. So I think all of that very much got into it. But it was that thinking of that old lady, and the realisation that right now, all of us sitting here, most of us who are powerless in the halls of power, I bet there's not one single person in this room who walks those halls of power. And if they do, they make their decisions that affect all of us. And we don't know how they make them or why they make them, but we live with the consequences. And in Hiroshima, on that day, the consequence was unbelievable. And I think in that moment, the real impact of what could be done by people with power came home to me. So for me, that was really what I was channeling. I did get interviewed in Tasmania on a channel years ago when the first book came out. And I was couched between a woman in psychic contact with Elvis Presley and a really hideous line of underwear. And I was given 5 minutes in between the 10 and the 15. And the woman had somebody to interview the week before about nuclear power, and she wanted me to talk about bombs and all the research I'd done. And I said, wait, I didn't actually research in the way that you're asking. But she didn't care. So she put me on, I was on television, and she asked the question she was determined to ask by, what kind of studies did you do into nuclear fission? So in a way, many times the things that are real in the book are always a metaphor for me for something else, or an outward expression of something inward. I think that's what my books mostly are about. It's trying to take out the inner journeying we do in our life and translate it outward. And even though I couldn't have clearly said that at 14, I think that's partly what I was doing when I was talking about the nuclear holocaust. But there's lots of things you write about when you touch on science fiction and fantasy. There's lots of books written that touch on things that later on come into play. Like if you look at Scatterlings, that was written way before there was any kind of really strong fears about, global warming or what was going to happen to the world. And that story contains a lot of that, because that was something I was concerned about back then. I don't know why or how, but I think when you tap into those kinds of thought streams, philosophical thought streams, you can often happen on something that doesn't really come into play until later on. The wrong answer. Will I ever continue the story of Ember and Glenna? The Dark Fall, the Legend Song series, I know that will be the next thing. Because for some time I've been getting letters saying, I really want the last Obernewtyn book, but more, I want the so it is coming, but I can't possibly do another book like that, one on top of the other. So that's a giant book, that will also be a big book, and in between so next year I feel I'll be working on smaller projects. But the next big thing, and the thing that I can't wait to get back to be, but I'm not telling anyone when I start. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hello. You mentioned at the start that you used to go through and look at all of the publishers' names in the books you were reading because they were the good books and you wanted to write like that. Could you tell me what they are? Because I suspect I'm going to need some reading material.
You mean the good books or the good publishers?
The good books.
The good books. Oh,
both.
God. Well, I don't know. I mean, a book is a personal thing. I mean, that's why it makes that's why the impact is that it is now. People who have a certain sort of, I was asked a lot over the years, are you writing the kinds of stories you are so you can tell people how to be better in the world? No, I'm not. I'm not that kind of even. I wouldn't feel I would be able to that. I wouldn't feel, I just don't feel that's my place to do that. But I do feel people align with me as a writer if they care about the same kinds of things. So I have to then assume you are my kind of reader. So if I recommend to you things like Ursula Le Guin or Sherry Tepper, or in particular a book called The Speed of Darkness by Elizabeth Moon, I really, really love that. And oh God, I can't think of them all off the top of my head. But my go-to woman is Ursula Le Guin. So I can find anything I ever need in her books, and I'm reading all of them. And Sherry Tepper, who I named, she's just won a Life Achievement Award for, I think, a World Fantasy Award. So she's someone you could look up, who's written some incredibly beautiful books. A book she wrote called Beauty, I would say, saved my life one night when I was in a really sad place, and not from anything in my own life, but just by seeing something on television, something to do with animals on television one night, that it made me feel like I just didn't want to live in a world where people did those kind of things. And I read her book, and by morning and the end of this enormous fat book, I found my way back to hope again. So I know books can do that for you, and the fact that sometimes people say that to me about my books, I feel like, yes, on one level. And on another level, how can one person do that when she only set out to do her own little thing in the first place? So it's bigger than you in the end. Yeah, they're the only ones I can think of off the top of my head. My apologies. Come to me on Facebook and I'll give you a really long list. Any other? Yeah.
Possible to write consistently in the company of other people, because you said you had to go to a retreat for a week to...
Yeah, is it possible to write consistently in the company of other people? Good question. I think you can ask any writer that and they'll start tearing their hair out, because it's always a fight for time as a writer. It's always, whether you're a poet or a musician or any artist, it's hard to take time away and say, this is for me and my art. Because people always, even we who are artists, always feel that actually that's the second thing, that eating and you know, all those other survival things. I think art is a survival thing. I think we need it, like we need food and we need air. And sometimes it saves you in the way that food and, well, air maybe, but food can't do. So I have to be a little bit practical here. I think the best answer is that there are times when you need to be alone. Like there are times when I'm writing certain aspects of things when I really want to be alone and I need to be alone. And I'll find a way to make that happen. But then there are other times when I like sitting in a cafe and writing and getting distracted by and listening. You know, I love sitting in cafes and listening to people talk, because you get some of your best stuff. People fight and end marriages in cafes or restaurants over expensive dinners because they know they have to stay civil in public. So they go out to do those conversations and you sit there and you hear them. So I get lots of ideas. And I don't mean I write down that conversation, I mean they spark ideas. I mean, as a writer, I'm very porous. I do think about the things that I'm going to write, but I'm always open to the world. So if I'm writing, for instance, some of the last, and the Legend Song books were particularly like this for me because of those segues. I found the segues in the world most of the time. And so sometimes sitting in a cafe would bring me the exact discussion that I would feel like that, yes, and I can draw that into my book. So I think it's good to stay open when you write, because you never know what ideas might come to your story. Yeah. Best advice for somebody who wants to become an author? Well, my first advice would be to not write for anybody else, to not care about publishers or readers or awards or teachers or your best friend or anybody, because your first audience as a writer is you. And if you can't feel about what you've written, then what's the chance of you making anyone else feel about it? It's really got to be something that you feel very passionately and strongly about. And if it can contain a question or something you're puzzled about or don't understand or troubles you, all the better. Because in a way the story becomes a search deeper into that, and a reader will share that search with you. And so the truer you are to yourself when you write, the more likely you are to write something really original. And let's face it, if you go to a publisher or to an agent, half of them are saying things like, oh, why don't you write a vampire novel? That did well. Why don't you write a post-apocalyptic novel like The Hunger Games? That did well. And that's the reason there's so many, you know, thinly written, big fat but thin books somehow. Because somebody thought that would be a good idea. It's not the right approach, you know. And the other main piece of advice would be to let your ideas sink down into you for a time before you write. Don't write. The minute you get an inspiration, don't sit and start to write. It's the first thing you want to do, but the last thing you should do, because you need to think before you write. And think about it for a while. Turn the idea over in your head, and when you do write it, think about it some more for a while. You know, at least half of it should be thinking. And the other thing about allowing an idea to go down into your head is that it moves from your conscious mind into your subconscious mind. And a lot of work we do as creators is done in our subconscious. And when we work deeply, we let it go down into our subconscious and we draw it back up again. And then it's something special. I remember I was staying at the Keesing studio. This is one of the great things that gets to happen to you as a writer. I was staying at the Keesing studio in Paris, and the Australian government has an apartment there. A lot of other governments have apartments there that people who are artists or writers stay at. So I was lucky enough to be staying there, and there was this very old, very lecherous Israeli artist there, and he was like about 78 or 9 or something like that, and he was this Lothario who was always trying to, you know, ask me out. But he was and I was like 24 or 5 or something at the time, so he seemed incredibly old to me. But he was also really attractive because he was terribly melodramatic and he was an incredible painter. He'd had this tragic life. His son had been killed in a bomb blast in the Israeli embassy. He was a very famous painter, and his wife had gone mad. And he painted these incredibly huge canvases and afterwards he used to shave wood or burn paper, and then he used to do them to make kind of like a diseased overlay, and it was like he saw everything in that way. That was his true vision of the world, and that's what you channel when you write from yourself. They were amazing paintings, but he said to me once, "Isobelle, don't write about Paris." And I said, "Why?" I was frothing at the bit to write about Paris. "Why shouldn't I?" And he said, "Because if you write about Paris the first time but you have not known it, it's name dropping. You can't name drop Paris." He said, "You have to let Paris go into you. And then when it comes out, it won't just be Paris, it will be Isabelle's Paris." You can see he was very seductive despite the age. I was like completely enchanted by him in some ways. But he was right. And it was something like 10 years before I ever wrote the story that's the first story in Metro Winds, which is called The Dove Game, and about Paris. And I wrote that story, in fact I wrote that story postcard by postcard to my brother on the other side of the world as a present, without keeping any copies, because I wanted to be a true gift, which means you can't keep it and keep copies of it for later. And years and years later he actually gave it back to me. I thought it was lost and I never thought about it, although I did wish I had it from time to time. And then one day he gave it to me as a laminated sheet, this gigantic laminated sheet of postcards. So stories have their stories too sometimes. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, wait.
Aside from Elspeth, who is your favourite character to write about, or the character you related most to?
In the Obernewtyn Chronicles? Well, I think the older I got, the more I felt I was channeling Merriman and his grumpiness and his "stop gnawing." I think my favourite character. Well, I think I really liked. I like Dragon. I really love her. I love her feistiness, and I love her. She's a passionate. Yeah, she's probably one of my most favourite characters. I love Golfer. I think he's a really noble sort of character. I'm extremely fond of Damien, and of course, you know, you have your book romances. Well, if I can have a book romance that's my romance, that would be. I think Rushton's kind of pretty nice. So those would be the ones that I would name off the top of my head. I really liked the character of Britta, that gruff older guy. I really like him very much too. I like the idea of this big bearded, tough kind of guy, and all of the parts of his family, his mother and father. I like him too. So that's my favourite. Yeah. You wanted to ask a question? So the question was the names of characters, where do they come from, and are they variations of people I know? They're not, but they do have to resonate. I was on stage once with a science fantasy author who shall remain nameless, because he said to the audience, "Look, if you want to have a fantasy sounding name, just have a name and get rid of the vowel and put in a comma, put in an apostrophe." And I just thought, "Oh, you are kidding me." That's how you... And you can't say, "What, you moron," on stage to someone else, because, you know, he's a nice guy. I said, well, that may be how he does it, but I actually do it a little bit differently. That for me, maybe it goes back to my oral storytelling, as in telling stories to my brothers and sisters, history. But the sounds of names have to sound right to me. They've got to resonate to the character. And so for me, a name, when it comes, always comes, I almost never change the name. It comes to me when I think of the character, and I very rarely start to write before I know the names of characters. And sometimes they're really named, like Rage in the Billy Thunder books. Her name came to me instantly, and she's the least rageous character you've ever seen. And that was really interesting. I thought, oh, that's a strange name, and I guess it's short for something. What would it be short for? Oh, Rebecca Jane. And so, see, I thought about it the opposite way. So names, naming is really, really important to me. So much so that the Red Queen, the title of the Red Queen, which I've known for some time, the publishers wanted me to change it because there is just recently reduced another very good book out with the title The Red Queen too. And I just said no. And she said, well, they feel it'll be confusing. And I said, well, so what? If they go out and they buy the wrong book and they enjoy a good book that's the wrong book, then if they want me, they'll go and buy my book too, and vice versa. And usually, actually, you look at the name of the author when you call it up, so you might actually figure it out. So I actually think my readers are intelligent enough that they're going to find me. And so I said that, and that was the end of the discussion. So I mean, there is no, you can't trademark names of books. I mean, you can come out tomorrow and have a book called The Red Queen if you want to, and go for it. You know, people can name their books whatever they want, but for me, that was the right name. If I could have come up with a different name that I also liked, but I couldn't. For that book, I couldn't, and that's what I wanted to be. And I also thought it would be hideously confusing on top of the horrible confusion that happened when the Americans split the books. And for a little while, against every promise, they brought the second book in the sending out as a and they called it The Red Queen for a short time before everybody jumped on their heads. And it was really confusing. And I know of at least one series I stopped reading because I just got so confused about where I was in the series. And so I mean, you do have to you don't have so much control over things. But I always think of things that come up outside Australia, they're idiosyncratic overseas publications. That's how I think of them. This is the real market for me. This is where it matters that I get it right. Over there was a question? Okay, thank you. The question is, would the 14-year-old me be satisfied with where the 57-year-old me took the story? Well, she was very romantic. I think she would have been surprised at how, I guess when I started to write, I sort of imagined she'd be more of a loner all along. If I look back, I've never been asked that question before, so I'm just thinking it through. I think if it went, I think she might have been surprised to see that she found friendships, and not only friendships, she found, and for me this was very important discovery in my own life as well as in Elspeth's, that at points she actually needed other people and was enriched by needing, not by always being strong. I always felt like I just need to be really strong and I need to be really independent and I have to look after myself and the people I care about, and so I've always had this kind of philosophy about life. I have to take care. And I mean, I was like the dad in my family. After my dad died, my mum was scared of everything. If anybody ever came to the door, like if a policeman came to the door, my mum would say, "Oh, something's happened, go and answer the door." And I would be sent to answer the door. And that would mean, like if she saw a policeman, because the last time a policeman had come to our door had been because my dad had died. So if anyone ever came and all of the kids were not home, and I have 7 younger brothers and sisters, someone had been killed or murdered in my mother's imagination. So she would just always leave it to me. So I always just felt like I have to be strong. I have to kind of keep it together, because it's weak if you rely on someone else. That's what Elspeth thought at the beginning, and that's what I thought very strongly. I thought, I will look after myself in this world. I won't rely on anybody else. But I did, and it softens you and it opens you. It makes you weak, but it strengthens you, that weakness. And that was one of those discoveries that I don't think that 14-year-old girl would ever have guessed that would come to her. So, good question.
With respect to the Twitter account that sent you that, like, didn't directly send you, but said that mean thing about you, and that was kind of venomous, but it turned out to be that she really loved you. Have you had any really venomous fan mail? Like, people just being, you know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it exists out there because people, like I've never bounced anyone off my Facebook, and my Facebook's open for anybody to come on, and I check to make sure the posts, I don't want anything ugly or horrifying posted on. I know there are some horrifying things out there, but I don't want the visual on my Facebook page. You know, I care about them too, but so I just check them, and that's all. And I have lots and lots of stuff coming on, but I've never had anybody say anything. Even that wasn't said directly to me, and it wasn't meant. Never in my. I know that the fan site probably feels a certain amount of anger, because I know that Min, who runs the fan site, says to me, you know, if anybody starts behaving badly, we deal with them. I assume that doesn't mean they assassinate them. And I can tell you, because he's not here, although he is sometimes, Boris Weitzman's launching the final book at a big party in Melbourne, and he told me the other day he was actually nervous to launch the book. And I said, "You're nervous? Why?" And he said, because he handles really big audiences, and he said, because I looked on your fan site. I said, and that put you off? And he said, well, they're just very passionate. He hasn't read any of the books, so he said, I think I'll have to read some before I can. I said, well, maybe that'd be a good idea. How does Oh, how does the ability of the characters translate into my life? Sometimes very comically. Sometimes I'm in the end of a long signing line and someone will come to me and clutch my hand suddenly and say, "You know what I mean." And I'm not kidding you, that happens reasonably often. And I sometimes get actually quite sad letters from people saying, "I'm being stalked by coercers. Can you possibly tell me how to block, how to mentally block?" It's sad because some of them really mean it. They really feel it. And what I think hard before I write back to those people, and I always think it means that they feel like they're under attack by something. And so what I have to write back has to be somehow engaging that. I can't take whatever imaginary thing that they've come up with, so I try to ground it in reality as possible and use the language of my books as a metaphor sometimes. So, I mean, I often wish that I had some of those powers. I'd love to be able to have, to be able to communicate telepathically with animals, although I think it would be agonising, because if I was the only one who could do it, that means every animal that was in pain, I would have to then convince people. I would be in an insane asylum, because no one would believe you if you were saying to them, "You can't do that, you can't do this." So I think many times that, like I said to my partner the other day, we were sitting somewhere and it really was beautiful, and I said, "It's such a beautiful day. Wouldn't it be great if you could just fly over there?" And he looked at me, he gave me a funny look, and I said, "Did you ever imagine you'd end up with a person who made a comment like that at 57? And he laughed and he said, "But just think about what it would mean. It would mean instead of looking out at that beautiful sky on those hills, it would be full of people flying with their shopping bags." And I thought, oh, you had to say that, didn't you? So yeah, I'm not sure how they translate. What I wish we would have though is a bit more empathy. I think we could do with some of that being translated into real life. Not us. All of you who are here, I don't have any doubt that I'm talking to the converted. But I think up there, they might need a bit more empathy for us all to survive. One more question, does anyone have? Okay, so the question is, I've talked about what inspired me with Obernewtyn, but what inspired me with the Legend Song series. I think I was walking, it was a number of things, and it's often a lot of things at once. My sister said to me, "You've never written about sisters. Why don't you write nice stories about sisters? You wrote about brothers." And I thought, "Oh, actually I haven't. I wonder why that is, because I'm really close to my family." So it was kind of floating in my head. I was very interested in twins. I had some really eerie and weird encounters with twins, and I'm just really interested in the idea of being a twin and what does it mean to be that close to somebody and how they mentally operate together. And the other thing was, I was driving along the Great Ocean Road. I have a house on the Great Ocean Road, and if you drive along it at night, because there's no lights, a lot of it's not built up, and if you drive along it on a moonless night, it's just it's black. There's no stars in the sky, there's nothing but the hill beside you splashed with a bit of a headlight, and then down there is the sea, which is like this void. And I was driving along and it was coming to darkness, and you know how when clouds come up from the horizon and it's just about to get dark, they become dark before the actual sky gets dark. And I thought, why does that happen? I mean, I'm sure there's some rational scientific reason, but I'm thinking it's like they suck up the darkness before it gets here. It's not nightfall, it's really darkfall. That's a great time, I like that. And I was thinking about this abyss, and I was thinking about sisters, and by the end of that drive, and it all started to really, I almost drove off the road at one point actually thinking about it. I took a corner too fast thinking about various things, so I'm not the world's best driver, I should say. Probably why I don't have a car. Yeah, so that's where that really came from. So it's always a collection of ideas but it was a long time before I started to write it. And it took me a long time to write the final one. It has taken me, because I've been waiting to figure something out. And sometimes you're waiting for something, just to go back to, maybe just to finish it off with those of you who write. Sometimes I don't believe in writer's block. I think sometimes you stop because you don't have all the ingredients you need and you haven't figured something out yet. Just give yourself a break. Just wait and see. Sometimes life, in fact, it always brings you what you want in the end. And I think the answer for you is not hammering at the same thing over and over, but just simply to wait until maybe it flows to you again. And for Darkfall, the lovely thing about being a writer of such a long time is that I know that's happening when it starts to happen. And it's like a constellation's beginning to form, and you think, oh, I think something's coming, I think it's happening. And you get tremendously, like every book I write, I think, this is it. This is it. I don't even know what it is, but I feel like that. This is it. And then I get to the end of the book and think, no, that wasn't it. But this will be it. And that's the next thing I start. I sound like a mad professor. On that note, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.